All right, today we've got a really cool one for you. We're about to dive into what is basically a legal detective story, straight out of the Talmud. We're going to follow a chain of arguments that are just incredibly intricate and brilliant, all to solve one very specific and very curious ancient puzzle.
Okay, so here's the central mystery. You've got this super strict law against misusing any sacred items that were dedicated to the ancient temple. But for some reason, one thing gets a unique pass. The blood from a sacrifice. It's totally exempt. The question is, why? What on earth makes blood so different? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out. So first things first, we need to get our heads around the main concept here, milah. Think of it this way. Imagine a charity has a special fund, and that money is only for buying medical supplies. If you dipped into that fund to buy yourself a coffee, well, that's a misuse of dedicated funds, right? Milah is pretty much the spiritual version of that. It's when you get personal benefit from property that's been set aside, consecrated, for a holy purpose.
Now, to solve our mystery of why blood gets a pass from milah, the Talmudic sages don't just give one simple answer. No, that would be too easy. Instead, they present three initial theories. And the really wild part? Each theory is built on a totally different interpretation of the exact same verse from the book of Leviticus.
It's just fascinating to see how each one hones in on a different little piece of that verse. Ula, for instance, focuses on the phrase, to you, and he argues, hey, the blood is a gift to the priests, so it's not even temple property in the first place. Then, the school of Rabbi Ishmael, they zero in on to make atonement, suggesting its purpose is so singular and important that the whole idea of misuse just doesn't apply. But the argument we're going to follow is Rabbi Yohanan's, because it introduces this powerful legal principle that sends us down an absolutely fantastic intellectual rabbit hole. He says the words "it is" imply that the blood status is the same both before and after the ritual.
So Rabbi Yochanan's logic seems pretty straightforward at first glance. He's saying that because blood isn't subject to misuse after its ritual is done, it must also not be subject to misuse beforehand. But here's the thing, that argument is resting on a much bigger general principle. And, as soon as the sages state that principle out loud, they immediately slam into a major contradiction.
And here is that principle. Once a sacred object has fulfilled its purpose, once its mitzvah is complete, the prohibition of me'ila, or misuse, it shouldn't apply anymore. It's done its job. That seems logical, right? It's a clean, consistent rule for how sacred things are supposed to work.
But there's always a but, isn't there? The ashes. The ashes from the daily clearing of the altar, they are a glaring exception. Even after their ritual duty is totally complete, they are still subject to the law of misuse. This one case seems to shatter the entire principle that Rabbi Yochanan's whole argument depends on. Suddenly, there's a bug in the system. And for thinkers who are dedicated to absolute logical consistency, a bug like that, well, it has to be fixed.
And this is where the Talmudic mind really shines. To solve this contradiction, the sages take a detour. And this isn't just about finding some clever answer. It's about stress testing the entire legal system to see if they can isolate this problem with the ashes so it doesn't break the whole structure.
To do this, they pull out a special legal tool called two verses that come as one. It's basically a way of handling anomalies. The best way to think about it is like this. Say you find two separate, totally unrelated parking signs, and they both say, no parking except for mail trucks. You can't use that to argue that all parking laws everywhere now have a mail truck exception. The rule says that because this weird exception shows up twice, these two cases are a unique, isolated pair, and you can't use them to create a general rule for anything else.
Okay, so the first move is to find a partner for our problem case, the altar ashes. The sages propose the high priest's special white garments that he wore on Yom Kippur. The idea is that these are also subject to misuse even after their job is done. If this holds up, then the two of them can be paired together as a two verses exception, which would seal them off from the rest of the legal system and save our general principle.
But wait, plot twist. Another sage, Rabbi Dosa, he disagrees. He argues that those vestments are not an exception. In fact, they can be reused by a regular priest. And if they can be reused, they aren't subject to misuse after the ritual, which totally breaks the pairing. The case is suddenly wide open again.
But the investigation doesn't stop there. The sages pivot, and they find a new partner for the altar ashes, the Egla Arufa. Now, this refers to a heifer from a very unique atonement ritual for an unsolved murder. And, just like the ashes, it's also prohibited from any benefit after its ritual is complete. And just like that, the two verses that come as one exception is back on the table, and our general principle is safe again. For now.
Just when you think it's all over, the sages raise one last, really expert-level objection. What if you don't even accept the two verses rule itself? I mean, some sages argue that two examples don't create an exception, they actually create a rule. And if that's true, then the ashes and the heifer would prove that everything should be subject to misuse after its ritual is done, which brings us right back to our original contradiction.
And this brings us to the ultimate resolution. The Talmud concludes that the biblical text itself has these built-in safeguards. For the ashes, the verse says, "And he shall put it," and that tiny word "it" is seen as a signal that this specific rule applies only to the ashes. For the heifer, the verse adds an extra description, "whose neck was broken," which is seen as another textual flag, signaling that this is a unique case. These textual limiters lock the exceptions in place, proving they can't be used to create a general rule. And with that, the side investigation is finally closed.
Okay, so now that we've seen how meticulously the sages defended their core principle, we can finally get back to the original mystery. Why did the Talmud present 3 different proofs just to exempt blood from misuse? Was it just being redundant? Well, the answer is a resounding no.
And here it is, the big reveal. Those 3 proofs weren't for the same thing. It turns out each phrase from that one verse was absolutely necessary to carve out a specific exemption for blood. One phrase exempts it from milah, the misuse we've been talking about this whole time. Another exempts it from notar, the rule against leaving sacred food uneaten. And the third exempts it from tumah, the prohibition of consuming sacred items while ritually impure. Each proof had its own specific job to do.
And as a final point of clarity, the sages note there's one more prohibition, pigul, which deals with having improper intent during the ritual, but blood doesn't need a verse to be excluded from that one. Why not? Because the blood is the very thing that permits the rest of the sacrifice to happen. It's the key that unlocks the whole ritual, and by its very nature, the key itself can't be subject to the rules of the lock it opens. It's just a beautifully elegant piece of logic.
So we're left with this. We started with a simple question about blood and ended up navigating this complex, incredible web of principles and contradictions and resolutions. The real takeaway isn't just the answer itself, but what the whole process reveals. What does this intense, detailed, and relentless journey tell us about the human drive to create a perfectly consistent and logical system, and the lengths we'll go to defend that system from even a single tiny contradiction? It's really a testament to a belief that every detail matters and every single loose end can and must be tied up.